How to embrace self-care as a high achiever. So growing up, my dad, just like most dads, he used to always give me stories about how he worked extremely hard, harder than we work nowadays. He would give me stories about how living in South Carolina, out in the country, to get money, he would have to pick cotton or pick tobacco or pick cucumbers and all this other stuff. Basically, he had to go in the field and work as if it was like 1801 in order to make money. And one story he would tell me was really good was that he would tell me that there were times he would go into the cotton fields and in a day he would literally pick 100 pounds of cotton. And when you think of cotton, you think of these like little small, like really light things, if you will. So the idea of picking 100 pounds worth of cotton in a day, I mean, that's hard work all in and of itself. Like, it's like, whoa, like that's like some like Herculean effort, or it's like a feat, like Rocky Balboa when he defeated, the Russian guy in the movie Rocky, or Apollo Creed and all that stuff. Like it was amazing to hear. I still have to say that to this day. With that being said, my father, he instilled one value in us. He instilled a lot of values, but one value he instilled in us was the value of hard work. He talked to us a lot about how it's important to get up early, the whole saying, the early bird gets the worm and all that stuff. But to get up early, to work hard, to show up, those little things. These were the principles he instilled in us when he would tell us to clean our room, clean the yard, wash the car, wash the dishes, like all these different things. And from there, what ended up happening was I developed this value of hard work. I developed this idea that when I'm working, I am doing something great. I'm valuable, right? Like all these different things. And being in sports, so my father plays sports. He's played football, basketball, and baseball. Like those are the sports he played. And also he was in the military. So he was definitely a hard worker and a like no nonsense type of guy. For me, I played basketball and I ran track in high school. So like the idea of hard work, working for things, right? Like it was something that just seemed natural. It seems like something that, we all should be doing, especially if there's something that you really, really want out of life. You can't get it without hard work. So what I'm trying to say is this value has been instilled in us, but a value that has not been instilled in us, a value that I think society just now is coming around to, is the value of self-care. The idea of self-care is something that's relatively new. One can also say that self-care was something that was seen that only rich people could afford to do, because people that aren't rich were obviously working, right? Working 1, 2, or 3 jobs. And I think now, especially the way inflation has been lately, that's the reality for a lot of people. Not too many people have the luxury of taking 3, 4, 5-day vacations or working just one job. A lot of people have side hustles. A lot of people have multiple streams of income, which requires, in some cases, multiple, let's say like efforts or hours or what have you, if you have multiple jobs, is really what I'm trying to say. But again, self-care is something that us as high achievers, we need to embrace. And I'm gonna talk about 3 ways that you can embrace this self-care. So point number 1, as the way to help you to embrace self-care as a high achiever, is to actually identify the purpose of self-care to begin with. So for a lot of people, they have this misconception of what self-care is. As I mentioned earlier, some people believe that self-care is something that rich people that live in Beverly Hills do, right? Like they get massages, or they sit by the pool and they have the cucumbers on their eyes and they have their hair wrapped up in a towel and they have a little robe on, if you will. Like that's typically the idea that comes to mind when people think of self-care, right? So it's like, how do I have time, or how can I be great if I'm taking time off? How can I be successful if I'm not working hard, right? Like I said, my father worked in the fields, right? The rural fields of South Carolina. So like, how can I be successful if I'm taking breaks? Well, as I mentioned, this is why we have to identify the purpose of self-care. So self-care, its main purpose is to give you the energy that you need to perform at the level that you need to perform at in order to accomplish these goals. And I can say this too, to accomplish those goals quicker and easier. There's this really great book. It's called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and I suggest you go read it. But in one of the habits, the 7th habit, I believe, he talks about the idea or the importance of what he calls sharpening your saw. So I give you a metaphor. I give you the metaphor that he gave. So imagine there's a little boy, he's playing in the backyard, and he kicks this red ball over the fence, right? He kicks it really hard, so hard that he can't see it no more. So he goes into the woods trying to find his ball, and he hears a sound. He hears the sound of something going back and forth, something being cut in half, and he goes and he finds out where it's coming from. And he looks up and he sees that there's this guy in the back, right? He's just in the back, just chopping wood. And he stops and he looks at the guy, and he's noticing that he's struggling, and he asks him, "Hey, mister, what you doing?" And the guy, who's busy, who's sweating, who's tired, he says, "Well, can't you see? I'm chopping this tree down. I'm cutting this tree." Well, the little kid stops and says, "Well, don't you think you should stop and sharpen your saw?" And the guy, who's very busy, very tired, he says, "Get out of here, kid. I don't have time to sharpen my saw. I gotta get back home and get ready for dinner." So the kid says, "Okay." So he keeps going in the woods, grabs his ball, and heads back home. But something that little boy realized that the old man didn't realize was the power of sharpening that saw. Because if he were to stop for just 15 minutes and sharpen that saw, he'd be able to cut his time in half, maybe in like more than half, in terms of the time he was using to cut down that tree. What I'm trying to say is, when he stops and sharpens that saw, he's able to cut that tree faster and with less effort. Therefore, he's able to get to where he needs to be faster and with less effort. The goals that you're trying to accomplish, you'll be able to get there faster and with less effort if you took time to rest, if you practice self-care. Now, something that I want to add that's a little bit a part of this podcast, but a little bit off, is that there's two things that can give us the energy we need whenever we're going through tough times. So one of them is self-care, and the second one is self-compassion. Self-compassion is the love, it's the words, it's the gestures that we send to ourselves whenever we're going through tough times. You can think of self-compassion as like a band-aid that's being put on our wrist whenever we have a cut, if you will. That's what self-care, or rather self-compassion, is. So what I'm trying to say with this first main point, the best way to embrace self-care as a high achiever is to identify the purpose of self-care. Because if you believe that self-care is something that lazy people who are not successful, or poor people, they do, and they do it so much and that's why they're poor, if you have these beliefs about what self-care is, then why would you do it? But if you believe that self-care is actually the way to increase your performance, then you'll be one of the first ones to actually participate in self-care. To even add to this last point, LeBron James, Russell Wilson, and a few really high performing athletes, there have been studies, or rather there's been, words or talks about these guys investing in over $1 million in their bodies to get them right for the season and to maintain them throughout the season. This is why guys like LeBron or Russell Wilson, very rarely do we see them get hurt. Very rarely do we see them put up poor performances, right? And the reason why is because they're ready, right? And not just ready mentally, but they're ready physically as well. And it's because they put in so much time in the off season to get themselves ready to endure this long season. All right, I promise this is the last point, then I'll move to the next one. Something that you should realize, something that you should ask yourself, right, when it comes to self-care is there a chance that I can be operating at a higher level if I participate in self-care? Is there a chance that I can be operating at a higher level if I participate in self-care? Because if you haven't practiced self-care in, let's say, months or years, you may be operating at 70% thinking that you're at 100%. So take the time you need, sharpen your saw so that you can operate at 100%. Point number 2 as to why it is hard for high achievers to embrace self-care is because they have an identity issue. More specifically, they are over-identifying with their work. What happens when you stop working? Are you still worthy? Are you still the person that you say that you want to be? Do you still look at yourself with the same love and respect and let's say admiration, if you will, when you're not working? One of the toughest things for athletes when they retire is to find out who they are. It's to use that free time that they have to invest in themselves, their family, or whatever the case may be. I can even say this: when these athletes retire and the lights go off, right? They're in their beds, it's late at night, no one else is around. The fans aren't cheering for them. They don't have their teammates or anything like that with them, right? Like they don't have an upcoming season to look forward to. Like when all of that ceases to exist, that is the times where these guys find themselves the most depressed. This is when they find themselves losing their mind, having a sense of like an identity crisis, right? Like they don't know who they are beyond the work or the sport that they play in. That's one of the toughest things for athletes. You know, I've had my fair share of professional athletes that I've worked with. And for these guys, believe it or not, it's almost like a grieving period that they go through. They feel as though they're grieving their dreams because now they know that it's gone, it's over, and that there's this new chapter that they have to embrace. You know, the same thing is true for you as well. When you're not working, when you're taking time off, I can even say when you're failing at your job or your business, right? Basically, when you're not operating at the level that you want to operate, I'm willing to bet that you may find yourself grieving as well. You may call it sadness, but sadness and grief, they're very similar. We're sad because something is gone. When people are grieving, they're grieving because a loved one is now gone. And when you're not working, there's probably a good chance that you find that you don't feel as worthy. You feel as though, you know, I'm not that hard worker that I want to be. And now I need to go back and, you know, put in more hours, right? And now we're getting to something called burnout, if you will. But here's the thing, guys. If you're able to let go of this identity, if you're able to accept yourself for who you are, right? Like you're a person who happens to have a job. You're a person who happens to have a business. When you can accept and see yourself for who you are, your ability to let go and to participate in self-care becomes easier because you're not over-identifying with, again, your career or your business. Now, with this being said, guys, when it comes to the life that we live, there are so many different domains of it. And this is something I do with a few of my clients, or really all of my clients, where we talk about the 4 domains of life. One of those domains is career and education, right? It's very important to our lives. It's something that we should invest time into. But there's other domains in our life. There's other things that make up who we are. So that second domain is relationships. So your family, your friends, your partner, right? Even the people in your community, right? These are all people that make up the relationship part of your life. The third part is personal growth and personal health. So what are you doing to, let's say, stay healthy? What are you doing to rejuvenate yourself, right? What are you doing when it comes to your personal goals, right? Whether it's to become more of a leader, increase your confidence, right? Any of those things. Get back into the gym, eat healthier, right? This domain of your life is something that we need to focus on as well. And then that last domain is leisure time. So what do you do to get away from it all? How do you recharge yourself when you find yourself feeling drained? These are the 4 domains of life, and career and education is just one of them. All right. I want you to think of it like this, if you will. I want you to imagine that these 4 domains, they're like seeds, and your time is like water. And if you're not careful, you're going to put all your water into that career seed, and it will grow and it will flourish. But what happens to all the other 3 seeds? Do they ever grow? Do they die? Good chance they will. And I would ask you, would that affect your career? Will that affect how you're living? Will that affect how you're running your business? It's a good chance it will. Have you ever seen someone who's an entrepreneur that's also going through a divorce? Have you ever seen someone who is trying to work a 9 to 5, but they're also, let's say, drained because they're not eating healthy, drained because they're burnt out, drained because they're not getting physical exercise, or let's say they're just not having fun because they're not having anything outside of work to keep them interested, right? So they don't have any hobbies, they don't have friends to talk to or whatever. Those people tend to perform at a low rate. They tend to perform lower than people who are, as I said with LeBron and Russell Wilson, they tend to perform lower than people that are actually investing in the other areas of their life, specifically rest. So I want you guys to know that this is actually a key component to actually performing better. But if you over-identify with your work, it's going to make it very hard for you to let go of it. So ask yourself, who are you outside of your job? Who are you outside of your career, right? Outside of your business? Ask yourself that question and be willing to let go a little bit so that you can recharge yourself to actually become the best version of yourself in those areas. My third point into how to embrace self-care as a high achiever is to include your loved ones when it comes to self-care. This is an absolute hack. It is something that is by far probably like the easiest and best thing that I've personally done in my own life. One thing that I love doing is going on trips with my family. Specifically, I love taking my son and my wife to South Carolina to visit my family, so my immediate family, if you will, and being able to just, see a different part of the United States, because we're here in South Florida and everything's so busy with, traffic and everything, and, the spaces are really, tight because we live in a big city, if you will. But when I go to South Carolina, it's like a breath of fresh air. The people are nicer, things are moving at a slower pace, plus things are cheaper up there as well. And it's such a breath of fresh air, if you will. But what's really great about this is that I can take time away from work and really do the things that I love. Yes, I love the work that I do, but at the end of the day, I work so that I can participate in the self-care part of my life. And that's something I think a lot of people miss. You're working for a reason. Yes, to serve people, to help people, to live out your dreams. But what is it that you want to do outside of work? When you're on your deathbed and your friends and your families gather around, what is it that you want to be able to look back on your life and say that you did? Do you want to look back and say, hey, I just worked all day, right? Or I was a hard worker. I made a lot of money. Or do you want to look back at the lives that you changed, the people that you touch, the fun times that you share with loved ones? I think it'll be those things. And because it's those things that you'll be desiring, that you would love to look back and see, those are the things we need to put first on our board. So again, we work so that we can do these things, all right? Our job, our business, it's not the end all be all. It's not. And if you doubt that, then I'm sorry, but you're sadly mistaken. And I see this from a lot of my clients. Some of my clients, they are so focused on work that everything around them is burning down, and eventually they wake up from all the smoke and the ash and they see that they've lost everything, and they come back to me because they're trying to help put it back together. We don't want that to happen to you. So include your loved ones within self-care. And one of the biggest ways that this will help is that you're attaching something that you value with something that you're struggling to do, if you will. It's kind of like going to the gym. For a lot of people, they go to the gym because they know that they want to be around longer for their loved ones. Other people, they go to the gym because they simply want to have a better mental health, and going to the gym would definitely help you with that. But you have to attach things that you value, things that you care about, with something like self-care or whatever it is that you're struggling with. Even the hobbies that you're going to do during the self-care. So if you're like me, you love sports, one self-care activity you should do is probably go to a basketball game, go to a football game, if you will, right? Those are the things that you should really be thinking about. And also, I'll even add this. When it comes to self-care, start small. Self-care doesn't have to be a 5-day vacation. For some people, they can't afford that. And for the people that can afford it, sometimes they feel as though their business will be all out of whack if they took that much time off. So what I would say is start small. Maybe you start off by working a half day on Friday and then spend the rest of that day out and about. Maybe you go downtown in the city, go to a nice restaurant, and just simply go and walk by the park, if you will. It's real simple, but we can build from that. And you also start to see that when you start work again on Monday or the next day, that you have a little bit more pep in your step. And that will be a reoccurring thing that will happen in your life. So these are the 3 main points to embrace self-care as a high achiever, and I'm gonna go over them one more time. So the first point was to identify the purpose of self-care. What do you believe self-care is? For a lot of people, they have the wrong belief about what it is, okay? The second point that I made is that you should not identify yourself with your work. This is one of the things that stop people from taking a break, because they feel like they're not being true, they're not being authentic with their values. And that's the thing that's gonna cause that grief and that sadness to set in when you're trying to actually take self-care. So make sure you don't over-identify with your work. And then the last one, point number 3, make sure that you involve your loved ones when it comes with your self-care, because whenever you do that, it makes it easier to do hard things. So this is Coach Wells. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast, and thank you for checking us out.